Hello again, and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is the Craps Coach. Thanks for joining in today. A little bit different. I don't really have a video showing you craps and crap strategy, but I do have an author here of a book about craps. Here with me today is Don Zarin. Don, welcome to my channel.
Hi, Mark, and thanks very much for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
So this is going to be an interview. Don is an author, and he wrote this book called Mr. Z. It's about his father. I've read the book. I can give you my opinion. It's a pretty interesting book about his father's playing craps. So Don, briefly, can you explain why you decided to write this book?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Well, first of all, I thought it was just a great story in and of itself. There are really many, many twists and turns that take place in the story, but it's essentially about a compulsive gambler, my father, who was called Mr. Z at Resorts International Casino. It takes place in Atlantic City during the period 1978 when resorts just opened for the first time in Atlantic City through the end of April 1980, and then at least in terms of his gambling, and then continues. But he was a compulsive gambler who loved to play craps at the highest levels. And the book, it provides that, I think, rare insight that takes you behind the scenes for the first time to know how the casino enabled him to gamble at such high levels out of control, and what they were thinking and what they were doing to enable that. He became really one of the biggest gamblers in the world playing craps. And the casino really saw that, watched it, and enabled it during all that time. But also the book has a lot more to it than just playing craps and just being out of control. There's a redemption element, how he recovered, got back on his feet after everything crashed. There's a family dynamic about our family, what happened, how we handled everything. There are a lot of twists and turns throughout the story. And then, as I wrote this book, I was imagining a Netflix type series, given all the characters, given the cinematography of all the gambling scenes that took place, 4 deep crowds around him while he's playing craps for a long, long period of time. So I just thought it was a story that needed to be told, and I told it.
This is a point of reference. What was your age during this time?
I was about 30 during that time. I was a practicing attorney for several years. And so, that's during that period. But, I grew up with him gambling. And maybe I should get into a little bit of the background of my father about how he came to become this gambler, if you'd like. Should I talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Why did Mr. Z like playing crap so much?
Well, he loved to play craps so much because it was, he thought it was this incredibly fast-paced, constant action, would take his mind off of work, relieve the pressure. For him, each roll of the dice was really a new fix for an adrenaline junkie, for anyone who plays craps. When he picks up the dice, he would say, "All is forgotten." And he would also say, when you get into a rhythm, when luck comes your way to your side, it's really exhilarating, and nothing compared with him with the excitement of playing craps. For him, it was actually, and he said this, it was actually better than sex. But he didn't start off playing craps. When he was younger, he played poker. He was a big poker player. He graduated college just before World War II started. He was at the Philadelphia Yard as a naval architect during World War II, where he started playing poker. When the war ended and he started his business as a housing developer, as a developer in New Jersey, he would play poker with a lot of people in New York. And a lot of Hollywood friends came out to New York, and he would play poker. And those stakes got bigger and bigger. I tell one story in the book about how a Hollywood producer was playing craps with him. This was in the early 1960s, and lost $20,000 to him. That's about $200,000 today. He didn't have the cash with him. There were no ATMs back at that time. So he went into the men's room, pulled off a piece of toilet paper, wrote a $20,000 check, and handed it to my father, which he then cashed in and actually was accepted at a bank. So, he started with poker. He then went on to horses. He loved horses. I really grew up at the racetrack. We owned box seats. We had box seats at Monmouth Racetrack in New Jersey. Our Saturday outing with the family was Monmouth Racetrack in the afternoon and Yonkers or Roosevelt Racetrack in the evening, in New York at night. And his comment was, that's a great family outing. Eventually, he bought some racehorses. He had about 5 or 6 horses racing up and down the East Coast for a while in the late 60s, the early 70s. And then he would go to the casinos. He would start going to seated casinos in the early 60s. And he had always hit a credit limit. He would play craps. That was his game. In the early 60s in Vegas, he hit a $50,000 limit, his limit, which today is about $500,000. And it took him years to pay that off. He would go to resorts in the Bahamas and play craps. He always had guardrails. And part of the story here that's really, astonishing, and really what the casino did, is eventually, after a year and a half to keep his business, they took the guardrails off and they gave him unlimited credit. And that's really what the essence of the story is about.
Can you it's interesting. Can you the guardrails, comps, I guess, are sometimes used to entice many gamblers, the big and small ones, what kind of comps did the casino give Mr. Z?
Well, he started playing. The casinos opened in June of 1978, or the Memorial Day in 1970, end of May 1978. The resorts, as you may remember, or as may know, was the first casino to open outside of Vegas. And resorts was really ahead of all the other casinos, so they were really the only casino out there for a good year before other casinos started to come online. So he had played in resorts in the Bahamas in 1975. He had lost $20,000, which is about $90,000 today. It took him up until January or February of 1978 to pay it back. But when resorts was opening, they had a non-casino part of their hotel first. So in March, he brought his whole team down to Atlantic City to build housing. He became really a leading housing developer. And having known my father, they gave him a small suite as a comp to begin with, before they even opened the casino. He used that as his home. He used that as his office. He then started playing. When he started playing in June was the beginning, and we'll talk a little bit in terms of the amounts. By the end of July, his credit limit was going up and up, and they then gave him a bigger suite that had a kitchen, a formal dining room, a very spacious, master bedroom. By November, they were giving him a limousine to go back and forth to his office in northern Jersey. You could have, at that time, any guest he wanted. You had unlimited meals, spa. Guests can go into boutiques and buy what they wanted. I was there once or twice during that period. I had a girlfriend with me. We had unlimited use of anything in the facility, any restaurant we wanted to. His rating, and we'll get into his ratings about that, but eventually by the following year, his rating became a #1 by April of the following year, so 10 months later. They then gave him the Frank Sinatra suite, which was the preeminent suite in resorts. He only had to leave that suite when Frank Sinatra came into town. And that was his home. He lived there. That was his office. Regency Casino then opened, I think, in that summer. And then they started to compete with him. They gave him a huge credit line. In December, they took my father on a yacht to the Bahamas. And so resorts was really getting nervous about what they were going to possibly lose as customer. They gave him a Piaget watch worth about $5,000. And then in the end, at the end of December 1979, in an effort to keep him, they decided the best way to do that was to give my father unlimited credit. And that's really where this story takes off.
You mentioned it, so maybe just for people that are watching this video, explain the casino rating system that for gamblers and how the casino tracks the daily winnings and losses.
Sure. The casino has a rating system from 1 to 5, 1 being the best, 5 being the lowest. And the rating system depends upon how long somebody plays and the size of their bets. And it's the pit boss, I think, that's overseeing a bunch of the crap tables who decides on the ratings. When my father started on June 11th, 1978, his credit line was $10,000. And that first night, he lost $3,000 and he got a credit rating of 2. And so that's a VIP credit rating, but not #1. #1 is the VVIP rating, is what I would say. By the following 9 months later, where his bets had dramatically increased, and the level of his play dramatically increased. He got a rating of 1, and he became then their preeminent customer. They also keep track of what the daily winnings and losses are. They have an annual a daily diary called a Red Book. And every night for bigger customers, they estimate the wins and losses of that customer for that night. So in my father's case, when they were deciding what to do about giving him unlimited credit or not, they wanted to know how much he had lost over the 18 months that he'd been playing since June 1978 till November 1979. They went back to the Red Book, and they came back and they said during those 18 months, he had lost $2.5 million, which today is about $11 million. They decided he was a good enough customer. They didn't want to lose him. And that's when they decided to give him an unlimited credit situation.
Okay. So again, most of my videos on my channel are about craps strategies along that line here. So, again, referencing your book about your father, why would you think craps players may want to read this book?
Well, this is the ultimate craps story. If you've ever dreamed, first of all, no one's ever played at his level, ever. He became the biggest gambler in the world playing craps. Usually you think of people playing poker or some other sport some other game like that. So his level of play was absolutely phenomenal. But if craps players ever dream about, which they must, the idea that they could have unlimited credit and play for an unlimited period of time, if that's their dream, well, here's the true story of someone who actually did it and what happened to them. So it is the ultimate high for him playing craps. I have all of the records of the casino. I have the credit record, so I'm able to know and trace his betting and his credits that went up and down, his winnings through the period of June 1978 to April to April 2000. So for a little over 2 years, I have his credit records, and I was able to use that to talk about how the casino went, how he won, when he lost. But this is the ultimate story for a craps player who's ever dreamed about gambling at this high level. There's never been anything like it before.
Do you know how long? So when I go play, I play maybe 2 or 3 hours at the most. If the table is hot and I'm doing well, maybe a little bit longer. Do you have any recollection as to how long, say, your father's session would be, like at the table?
Sure. Well, let me sort of describe it as I can. So at the beginning, in June of 1978, he would play in the evening for a few hours. And then he would play, 3 or 4 times a week. He would go back and forth between northern New Jersey, where he lived and where his business was, come back to the casinos where he was trying to do housing there. So he averaged maybe 3 or 4 or 5 hours a night for the first 3 or 4 or 5 months. Then he would start playing before dinner, and he would go out for dinner, and then he would come back and play after dinner, probably till closing. And he continued that through the following year. And a year later, let's say by the summer of 1979, he was there, let's say early evening, dinner, and then the whole night. And he'd have crowds that were around the gambling table, 4 rows deep, following him, Mr. Z, Mr. Z. Then let me talk a little bit about the crazy period that happened, because that was talking about time frame. In an effort to keep his business, they had a meeting in late December, and they said, what can we do to keep Zarin's business? And they said, well, he's always been upset about his credit limits. Let's give him unlimited credit. Well, for a compulsive gambler, this was the first time that his compulsion ever had an unlimited road to go without guardrails. They took away the guardrails. So he started to gamble from about 10 in the morning till closing. He would gamble 12 to 15 to 17 hours a day. And in the month of January, he gambled about 17 days at that length. In the month of February, 20 days, 15 to 17 hours a day. In March and April, he didn't stop. He gambled 15 to 17 hours a day. And he was putting down, during that period, they had raised the credit limit at the craps table initially to $2,000 a point, but then to $2,500 a point at his request. So his bets were from January to April, $2,500 on the pass line, $7,500 behind the pass line, and $2,500 on each of the points. So he had between $20,000 and $25,000 on the craps table on each roll of the dice. That's about $110,000 today. So every roll of the dice, he had $110,000 on the table from 12 to 15 to 17 hours a day. The casinos were watching this. They knew this. They were paying close attention. They were saying to themselves, the vice president, and I have their testimony, the vice president in operations was saying, in his life, he's never seen anyone play at that level, at such sustained levels, and he can't imagine how it would continue. And the credit manager would say, well, it can't continue forever. Eventually, he's going to run out of money, but don't worry, he has enough property, we'll get paid. And every night they were reporting up to the president to tell him what Zarin was doing during that crazy period. In addition to that, he had gotten permission to sign non-gaming checks, which are checks you're allowed to not use at the casino, but they would cash checks for you. Initially, he told them it was for payroll. They gave him a security box, which he would take all his monies to. They also had a security guard watching him playing so that no one would take his chips, which became very voluminous at the table. But he was cashing during this 4-month period non-gaming checks of $60,000 to $100,000 several times a week and going to his local bank 3 blocks away and depositing $100,000 in cash. Can you imagine something? And that's equivalent to about $450,000 today. He was depositing effectively $450,000 in cash 3 or 4 times a week over 4 months. Eventually, he deposited $7 million in cash at the local bank to cover all the checks that he was writing, and he completely lost track of what he was signing, whatever checks he was writing, what markers he was signing. He had no idea what was going on. But that was the level of play that took place during that period, Mark.
So you talked about the unlimited credit that the casinos extended him. Has things changed since that time? So, this time period is at the essentially when Atlantic City was starting to welcome gambling. So have things changed since that period of time? And given our present,
they have because the casino was charged with violations of hundreds of regulations for what they did and how they dealt with my father. They violated every possible regulation they could. My father got in a lot of trouble because at the end, his checks bounced. And 93 of his checks started to bounce and bounce. And he was eventually criminally charged. And we can get into what happened and how he got out of that and redeemed himself. But the casinos were also civilly charged. And the attorney general wanted to take their license away. So their license was threatened. And eventually they were able to resolve that without losing their license. There was also the State Commission of Investigations held hearings about a year or two later about the credit controls and what had happened to Zarin. There was 4 days of hearings. So there were a lot of changes that were implemented after that. So all of those things are no longer happening today.
Okay. Yeah, it's very, very overall interesting story. So does Resorts, this curiosity, does Resorts Casino, and I believe that's the correct name of the casino that he played at, does Resorts Casino still exist today?
They do. They're still in
Oh, wow.
operation. They
Wow.
are.
All right. Is there, I mean, obviously that was decades ago. Are you still welcome there? Is the name?
I don't know. I haven't heard from them since the book came out a month ago. I'm not sure
Okay.
how aware of them they are, but I think they're trying to keep the story as quiet as possible would be my
Okay.
guess.
All right.
But this was a story in every press. I mean, there was a field day of the press that, the Atlantic City Press, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the New York Times. So there were just tremendous amount of press stories back during that period. Since then, there has not been.
Okay. All right. So, yeah. And so, again, it's more curiosity. So you're obviously, this was your father. It sounds like he was kind of almost a celebrity, if you will, and kind of in that world, with the VIP status. Do you get a chance to meet any other famous people during that time?
No, he was too immersed in his gambling, but he was famous in 2 ways. There was really a good split personality, I would say. It was David Zarin, who became really one of the leading businessmen in Atlantic City. He built major housing because at that time, Congress had recently passed what are called Section 8 housing, for subsidized housing for senior citizens and low and moderate income people. So he went into Atlantic City, had built the first Section 8 housing in Pennsylvania a year before, took his model in there, and became a leading businessman. He became Citizen of the Year, got Citizen of the Year awards in Atlantic City. That was David Zarin. And then Mr. Z at the casino was equally or more famous at the casino. And sometimes he would put on the David Zarin hat and go to his business meetings. And then he would put on his Mr. Z hat and go back to the craps table and play. But during that period, he was so consumed with his gambling that he didn't really think of anything else. Then after that, he was consumed with resolving the problem and settling with resorts and getting everything behind him. He was able to do that. And then he was able to go back and get his business started again. And it became very successful. And then a few more twists and turns turned that around a little bit, but not related to gambling, but arising from the gambling debacle that had happened to him.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah. So is there anything else, that you'd like to kind of speak about this book? Again, like I said, for everybody watching this video, I have read it. It's very interesting. It, kind of reminded me a lot of, a story that just kind of kept getting wilder and wilder as you go through the pages. Is there anything else you'd like to speak about the book for us?
Well, I think the whole issue of compulsive gambling, I mean, people, is an issue that just has not gotten enough attention. In 1980, when all this blew up, was the first time that the Psychiatric Association recognized compulsive gambling as an illness. I think today, with sports betting, with online gambling, with all the casinos all around the country, there's, I think more attention needs to be given to that and more support to that. Craps is a great, great game. I love playing craps. Obviously, my father loved playing craps, but I think people also just need to make sure they're in control of what they're doing if they can.
Okay, and so where could somebody find this book? Can you talk about where the book you've written can be found?
Sure, it's on Amazon. If you go to books on Amazon and type in Mr. Z, you can get the ebook or the paperback or the hardcover book from Amazon. You can also order the hardcover book in any bookstore around the country.
Okay.
You can also go on my website, mrzbook.com, and you can order it on the website.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah, and I will put that website in the description of this video, if that's all right with you.
That'd be great. Thank you, Mark.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So let me just, unless Don, you have anything else you want to say? I'm just kind of going to wrap this up. Keep kind of the content to 30 minutes at the most here. Is there anything else you'd like to kind of impart or kind of speak about before we stop the video?
Nope. Thanks very much. Appreciate being here.
Okay. Yeah. No, again, so this is a little different for me. Most times I'm doing videos on dice. You just see, dice strategies, maybe talking about craps. Honestly, it's the first time I ever appeared on camera versus behind the camera. I usually don't appear on camera. That's by choice. But again, for all the viewers, appreciate you joining in today. Again, as always, make sure you like and subscribe. That way you're alerted to our latest content. And I appreciate everybody joining in today. Thanks for watching.